He thought his badge made him untouchable. For years, he wielded it like a shield, silencing voices, twisting the law, and walking away without consequence. But when he dragged the wrong woman into court, a woman who refused to be broken, everything began to unravel. This wasn't just a case. It became a mirror reflecting the ugly truths people wanted to ignore. How far would he go to protect his power? And how far would she go to fight back? On the surface, Angela Morris lived what many would call an ordinary life. She was 34, a single mother, and a dedicated nurse who had worked countless double shifts to keep her son in school and food on the table. Her world revolved around early mornings filled with coffee and exhaustion, and late nights where the hum of hospital machines was often the last sound she heard before collapsing into bed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Angela was known in her community as steady, dependable, the kind of woman who showed up for others even when she was running on empty herself. Neighbors would smile when she passed by, and children often waved at her when she returned from work in her scrubs. She wasn't wealthy, and she wasn't influential, but she carried a quiet dignity that made people trust her. Still, there was a heaviness in her life, one she rarely spoke about. Living as a black woman in a small town meant she felt the weight of eyes on her in places where others moved unnoticed. At the grocery store, at the bank, even while driving to work, she could sense when suspicion trailed her, subtle but sharp. She had learned to keep her head down, to move carefully, to never give anyone an excuse to twist her presence into a problem. But Angela wasn't weak. Beneath her calm exterior lived a steel strength, sharpened by years of struggle and quiet resilience. It was the same strength that had carried her through nights when bills piled higher than her paycheck, and the same strength that had taught her son never to let anyone define his worth. Life, however, has a way of colliding the ordinary with the unthinkable. For Angela, the shift began subtly. A traffic stop here, a sideways glance there, and a quiet whisper that she was too outspoken when she stood up for herself at work. Little warnings that, on their own, might have seemed harmless, but together they painted the outline of something darker, something waiting to erupt. And then there was him, Officer Daniel Reeves. In town, his name carried a strange power. Some saw him as a man keeping order, while others, especially people like Angela, saw a shadow that trailed too close. He was known for his sharp temper, for the way he could make a routine stop spiral into humiliation, and for how quickly complaints against him seemed to vanish. With his badge and connections, he walked like a man convinced nothing could touch him. Angela's path and Reeves' path had crossed before, but always at a distance. He had pulled her over once without reason, asked unnecessary questions, made her wait 15 minutes before letting her go with a cold smirk. She had told herself to forget it, to keep moving, because what good would it do to fight someone who had the system on his side? But fate doesn't care about silence. It doesn't care how careful you've been. Angela had no way of knowing that soon her name would be dragged into a courtroom, not as a nurse, not as a mother, not as the woman she had worked so hard to be, but as a target. Her strength would be tested against a man who believed his badge placed him above the truth. The ordinary days she clung to so fiercely, the small joys, the steady routines, the fragile sense of peace were about to shatter. And when they did, the fight wouldn't just be about her. It would expose something far bigger, something festering in the very foundation of the place she called home. The first strike came like a thunderclap in Angela's quiet life. It wasn't violence, at least not the kind people imagined when they thought of danger. It was subtler, more calculated. One afternoon, she received a letter, thick paper, official seal, her name typed in bold. Summons to appear in court. Angela's chest tightened as she read it. Officer Daniel Reeves had filed a complaint against her, accusing her of obstruction during a lawful investigation. She remembered the night in question. A neighbor's son had been stopped by police outside her apartment. She had stepped out, simply asking why the young man was being detained. Her voice calm, measured. She had done nothing more than what any concerned neighbor would do. But in Reeves' hands, that simple act became a weapon against her. The courtroom was not a place Angela ever imagined herself. She had always trusted the system to some degree, even when it disappointed her. But the moment she walked into the courthouse, her faith began to fracture. Reeves was there, standing tall in uniform, his badge gleaming beneath the harsh lights. He didn't look at her like an accuser facing the accused. He looked at her like prey. The proceedings moved quickly. Too quickly. Reeves spoke with confidence, weaving his story with ease. He painted Angela as disruptive, aggressive, a woman who had interfered with police work. His words were sharp, rehearsed, dripping with the kind of authority that came from knowing his position would shield him. Angela sat frozen, her palms sweating. She wanted to scream the truth, to remind them she had done nothing but ask a question. But when her turn came, her voice trembled. The judge barely looked at her. Each word she spoke seemed to dissolve in the air before it even reached the bench. Outside the courtroom, whispers followed her. Neighbors who once smiled began avoiding her eyes. Some muttered that she should have known better than to challenge an officer. Others shook their heads quietly, too afraid to say anything at all. Isolation wrapped around her like chains, and Angela began to feel the slow burn of fear. But fear was not the end of it. Reeves wasn't satisfied with dragging her to court. He began showing up near her street, a patrol car idling a little too long at the corner, his gaze lingering when she walked her son to school. The message was clear. Stay silent, stay small, or pay the price. Nights became the worst. Every creak in her apartment, every shadow outside her window felt like a warning. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, it was broken by jolts of panic. She could see her son watching her carefully, confusion clouding his young face. He didn't understand why she jumped at every knock on the door, why her laughter had grown so rare. Still, she tried to hold on, tried to go to work, to move through her routines. But the world around her was shifting. She noticed patients whispering when she walked past. Friends who once called stopped answering her texts. Reeves' accusations had done more than place her in court. They had stained her reputation. And in a town where his word outweighed hers, the stain spread fast. Yet, amid the despair, something else began to stir. Angela realized that silence was exactly what he wanted. Obedience, fear, compliance. And she had given him none of those when she first spoke up. That thought became a flicker of strength, but with every flicker came risk. Because the more Angela resisted, the more aggressive Reeves became. One evening, as she left the hospital, she noticed his patrol car parked across the lot. Engine running, headlights off. She clutched her keys, heart pounding, forcing herself not to run. She slid into her car, locked the doors, and drove away. But the sight of his headlights in her rearview mirror made her throat tighten. Was he following her? Was this intimidation? Or something worse? The chase didn't last long. After a few blocks, his car turned off. But the fear lingered, clawing at her chest. Angela now knew with certainty this wasn't just a case of harassment. This was a battle of endurance, of power, of survival. And the cracks in the system, the ones she had always tried to ignore, were beginning to reveal themselves in their rawest, ugliest form. She wasn't just up against one officer. She was up against a shield that protected him, and with every passing day, she felt that shield pressing down harder, daring her to keep fighting. Angela had endured the whispers, the courtroom humiliation, and the constant shadow of Reeves trailing her every step. But nothing compared to the night it all came crashing down. It was late, past midnight, when Angela was driving home after a double shift. The roads were empty, streetlights flickering like tired eyes, when she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her stomach dropped. She slowed, pulled to the side, and gripped the steering wheel, whispering a silent prayer. She knew who it was before he even stepped out. Reeves. His figure loomed in the mirror, deliberate, heavy, the kind of presence that filled the night air with menace. He approached slowly, his flashlight beam cutting across her face. Step out of the car. Her pulse quickened. She had done nothing wrong. She had driven under the speed limit, signaled every turn, kept her headlights on. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door and stepped into the cold night. The asphalt beneath her shoes felt like ice, though the air was warm. Reeves circled her like a predator, his voice low, sharp, accusing. He claimed she had swerved, that she had been reckless, that she was a danger on the road. Angela's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to fight, but fear sealed her lips. She knew how quickly resistance could be twisted, how one raised voice could become disorderly conduct, how one movement could end in something worse. Then came the moment that froze her blood. Reeves demanded she put her hands on the hood of her car. The command was sharp, cutting, and final. Angela hesitated. Just a breath, just a flicker of pause. But that was enough. In an instant, Reeves grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot up her shoulder, and she cried out, stumbling forward against the car. His weight pressed down, the cold metal biting into her skin. She could hear his voice, low but venomous, spitting accusations she couldn't even process. Drunk driving, resisting arrest, interference with law enforcement. Every word was a lie. But lies were his weapon, and the badge gave them power. Her chest pressed against the hood, her cheek against the metal, tears mixing with sweat. She felt utterly trapped physically, emotionally, spiritually. For years, she had fought to stand tall, to protect her son, to build a life of dignity. And now, in the span of minutes, that life was being shattered under the weight of one man's power. Flashes caught her eye. She turned her head just enough to see them. Cell phones. Passers-by had stopped. People were recording. A crowd had begun to gather, their murmurs cutting through the night. Angela's heart pounded. She realized this moment wasn't hidden in the shadows anymore. Reeves might have the badge, but she had something else. Witnesses. Reeves seemed to realize it, too. His grip tightened. His jaw clenched. His eyes flickered with something close to panic. For the first time, he wasn't entirely in control. And then sirens. Not his. Different ones. Another patrol car pulled up, lights flashing, officers stepping out. The crowd shifted, voices growing louder. Angela's world spun in chaos. She was still pinned, still humiliated, still bleeding from the weight of injustice. But now, with cameras rolling and backup arriving, the script was changing. The lies weren't as safe. The shadows weren't as dark. Her breath came ragged, her body trembling, but deep in her chest something stirred, something like defiance, something like hope. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the breaking point. And as she was lifted from the hood, wrists cuffed, body aching, one thought burned through her: pain. If this is what it takes to show the truth, then the world will finally see him for what he really is. Angela's arrest. That night was not the end, it was the beginning of something larger than either she or Reeves could have imagined. The cell phone video spread quickly. By morning, the footage was already circulating across social media, shared by neighbors who had once remained silent, by strangers outraged at what they had seen, and by voices far beyond her small town. The images were undeniable. A uniformed officer pinning a nurse to the hood of her own car, her cries echoing against the cold night, her body trembling under the weight of power gone unchecked. For years, Angela's quiet dignity had been ignored. But in that video, her suffering became impossible to look away from. The courtroom, once a place where she felt invisible, became something else entirely in the weeks that followed. This time, when she walked in, rows of community members filled the benches. People who had whispered in fear before now stood openly, demanding accountability. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked, and for once, the silence that had protected Reeves began to crack. Angela testified, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She spoke not just for herself, but for every person who had been silenced, every person who had been told their pain didn't matter. She described the fear, the humiliation, the way her son had watched her carry the weight of injustice. She looked directly at the badge that had been used as a weapon against her, and she refused to bow her head. The trial did not erase what she endured. It did not undo the nights of terror or the scars of humiliation. But it brought something vital: exposure. The shield of untouchability that Reeves had hidden behind was gone. His reputation fractured, his authority questioned, and the community he once intimidated began to see him not as protector, but as predator. For Angela, the impact was deeper than any verdict. She walked away from the courthouse not just as a survivor, but as a voice. She had carried the weight of silence for too long, and now her story was part of something larger, a chorus of voices demanding change. But even in her victory, the questions lingered. Why had it taken a viral video for her pain to matter? How many others had been crushed without witnesses, without cameras, their stories buried beneath the weight of power? Angela knew her fight was not unique. It was one thread in a vast, tangled web of racial injustice that stretched far beyond her small town. Her life would never return to what it was before. The simple routines, the quiet dignity, the desire to just live without fear those had been stolen. But in their place, she found a different kind of strength, one rooted in truth, one that could not be silenced, no matter how heavy the badge or how loud the lies. And so the story of Angela Morris became more than just a personal battle. It became a reminder, a mirror, a question posed to every person who watched her stand against injustice. How many more Angelas must there be before the system changes? How many more times must truth be caught on shaky cell phone footage before it is believed the first time it's spoken? Angela's story is not history, it is the present. It is happening now, in cities and towns across the world, to men and women whose only crime is daring to exist where someone thinks they don't belong. The world saw her humiliation. The world heard her cries. The question that remains is not whether it happened, it is what we will do with the knowledge that it did. Because Angela's fight is not hers alone. It is ours. And the next chapter is not written by her, or by Reeves, or even by the court. It is written by us. So ask yourself, when the next Angela steps forward, will you look away? Or will you stand beside her?